Greetings, you're listening to Cantus Firmus at the Movies. My name is Cody, and I'm discussing the film Arrival with my friend here, Joseph Cox. Joseph Cox is a filmmaker. His production company is Average Joe Films. He has a new web series you can actually check out on YouTube right now called Ground Rules for Living with Your Ex. And you actually have a film as well that was it won the 48-hour film? Well, explain that.
So this past summer, I actually entered the 48-hour film project, which is a huge film project where you have 2 days to make a film from scratch. It has to be 7 minutes or less, and it's over 70 cities around the world compete. And I entered for Cincinnati this past year, and with our film, The Windows Are Always Clean in Portland, we won Cincinnati, and we'll be representing Cincinnati at Filmapalooza in Paris next year against 76 other cities.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. And now with Filmapalooza, is it the top 10 entries?
Yeah, so the top 10 entries from Filmapalooza actually go on to Cannes Film Festival.
Okay, that's pretty awesome. And actually, I've seen that film, the Portland film, the windows are always clean in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, and it's kind of amazing you just did put that together in 48 hours.
I could not have done that without my producer John Newkirk. He really pulled together an amazing team. I was going to do what I've done in previous years, and that was throw together a group of like 10 friends, and he ended up getting me a crew of over 20 people. And I had an amazing director of photography, Christopher J. Hagen. That guy is off the hook. I could not have created the look of that film without him. And my editors, I did very little on that film. I wrote it and directed, but I did very little as far as the production of that film. And our special effects guy Jack, it was an amazing team.
Yeah. Now with the special effects, were those computer effects or were those practical effects? Or?
So they were actually it was visual effects. I said special effects, but it's visual effects. Jack Wiley is a visual effects artist who did it all on computer, and so when I sent him the script the night before, which was an entirely different script than what we ended up doing, he started designing like a UFO type device. And sent me like renderings of it really early on, like within an hour or two of me sending him the script, and then we ended up changing the script entirely, and it became a weather machine.
Yeah,
in the final version.
That's really cool. So now were the effects part of the 48 hours that had to be done?
Yes. So wow. we had Jack was literally working for 2 days on visual effects with us while we were filming. He was rendering effects that he didn't even have real footage other than like screen grabs and photos as we were filming.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
We shot the whole thing in 12 hours on that Saturday. So I wrote it Friday night. We started at 7 a.m. on Saturday and we filmed till 7 p.m. Saturday night. And then we started doing ADR, which is voiceover recording for some scenes. And then we edited all night and into Sunday. And then by Sunday at 4 p.m. we had picture lock, which was actually about 2 hours before deadline.
Wow. So now how did you get involved in filmmaking?
So I started making films in high school when I was homeschooled. I had a lot of spare time, and all my friends were at school, so I started learning how to do stuff. Thought I knew everything, and then I went to film school and found out I knew nothing. Mm-hmm. And so I went to film school at Cincinnati State, and had a lot of great mentors and professors who pushed me along, and I really found I had a knack for communication and not quite a knack for storytelling. So I learned how to become a better storyteller and found ways to, tell the stories I wanted to tell and make the kind of movies I wanted to see being made.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's actually kind of... I stole something from Gandhi. So when I started the podcast... I stole this, be the change you want to see in the world. Mm-hmm. So I try to be the podcast I want to see in the world. So I think that's sort of what you're doing with filmmaking. Is
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I have a weird sense of humor, and I know there are other people out there who have a weird sense of humor too. So my comedies are very an acquired taste. So now I'm dabbling in kind of dramatic filmmaking and stuff like that. To see what I can pull up. We're actually getting ready to start production this coming weekend on a science fiction noir.
Oh,
film.
Nice.
So
Blade Runner-esque.
Yeah, there will be some nods to Blade Runner, some nods to Casablanca and old, 30s, 40s, and 50s films that we've known and loved and grown up on.
Sure.
And
you're getting on that spaceship, Zarny Whoop. All right. So The film we're talking about is Arrival. It was made pretty recently, 2016, and I'm going to try to pronounce this French-Canadian director's name, Denis Villeneuve.
Yes, Denis Villeneuve, one of my favorite modern directors. He also did Prisoners a few years ago, and just did the new Blade Runner film.
Yeah. And now, so this film actually did pretty well in Oscar season for a science fiction related film. It was nominated for 8 Oscars and it actually won only one for sound editing.
Yes, and that was well deserved.
And it was kind of impressive to see a science fiction film break into the Academy Awards like that.
It was actually I think it was my favorite film for the best film category last year, along with La La Land, as basic and white as that sounds. But I actually thought Arrival was the most original film that was up there during the Oscars last year, to be honest.
Yeah. So now I'll go into just a little bit of discussion of the cast, and I've got a very brief plot outline. So this film stars Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, Forrest Whitaker. Amy Adams plays a linguistics professor named Louise Banks. Jeremy Renner, fella, so he was in The Avengers as the Hawkeye.
Yes, that's
kind of more famously. He plays a physicist. Forrest Whitaker is an army fella or military guy, Colonel G.T. Weber. And the basic plot outline is that Amy Adams, Louise Banks, is a linguistics professor. During a class, she learns that some unidentified flying objects have landed on Earth. The world reacts to this news, mostly with panic, as one might expect. She's asked by Forrest Whitaker's character, Colonel Weber, to translate an audio recording of one of the aliens and is brought to the site of a UFO landing with Ian Donnelly, Jeremy Renner's character, who's a physicist, as I'd mentioned. She's brought into the shell, which is what they call it, the UFO, where she seeks to communicate through a written language because they're not having a lot of luck with the verbal forms. The big conflict in the film is that there's this misunderstanding that occurs which causes the major world governments to suspect the aliens are hostile, but Amy Adams' character, Louise Banks, cracks the code with information she, quote, remembers from the future. So the basic idea is in this is that as she's learning their language, they don't see time in a linear
spoiler
fashion.
Warning.
Yeah, there's always spoilers. There's always spoilers
on this.
There's always spoilers in this. So yeah, she remembers this information from the future because as she's learning their language, she begins to think the way that they do. They don't see time in a linear fashion. They're aware of past, present, and future sort of simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So something she remembers from the future helps her to crack the code and sort of save the day, so to speak. Now, maybe just very broadly, what did you think about the film?
First off, I love the film because I feel like it's one of the most original takes on sci-fi we've seen in a long time. There are a few, nice little nods to like 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's specifically when she's being, transported from her house to the site. I love the overpowering sound as she's overwhelmed. The sound overwhelms us, and we can hardly hear the dialogue anymore because she can hardly hear the what's being said to her, and she can hardly take in what's happening. And so these slow camera follows through tunnels and stuff. It reminds me exactly of 2001: A Space Odyssey. That kind of moment where you see something you've never seen before, and the audience is actually taken on a ride with her specifically through her lens. And but this film is doing something sci-fi hasn't done in a long time, and that's amaze and make you think. So that's one of the things I actually appreciated about this story was that she kind of Denis Villeneuve kind of uses that slow storytelling style in a Kubrick-esque fashion to bring a modern sci-fi story to life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wasn't totally sure how I was going to feel about it because it was one of those films I heard different things about. Heard some people say it was great, heard some people say, oh, it was terrible. It was kind of like Contact in a way, I think, or some people just were expecting something different, maybe, from a science fiction film.
I went in expecting something entirely different. I did not expect to love it.
Yeah,
I expected to be like, yeah, it's a sci-fi film.
Yeah,
and then my wife actually is the one who recommended it. She went and saw it with some friends, and she said, Joe, you are going to love this movie. Yeah. It's totally the type of film you would like. Sure.
Well, it really grabbed me, too, because I was sort of in a place where as I was watching it, I kind of had to keep getting up and doing different things, and every time I had to pause it, I was like, oh, gosh, I need to figure out what's going on here. So it was kind of tough to do it. So this film did win an Oscar for sound editing, sound design. What did you think of the score?
The score by Johan Johansson is just absolutely phenomenal. When they were seeing the pods for the first time, this little I don't even know what instrument he's using there, but it sounds so foreign, and it's like totally unsettling.
It's kind of got the vibrato kind of thing.
Yeah. It's like I don't even know what that was, and he's leaving it in Discord, and it's just phenomenal.
I really like the film a lot. There's some really interesting themes that are there philosophically, and there are. Maybe I'll talk quickly just as we're sort of talking about the film overall and how it affected us. I will say there's a few things that I didn't necessarily like. One thing was I felt like they kind of went overboard in their characterization sometimes, in ways that felt sort of inauthentic. So, for example, when she's trying to get the gig to help translate the alien language, they're thinking about somebody else, and she says, "Well, ask him what Sanskrit for war is." And it was just this strange thing where I don't know. It didn't feel like something that somebody would say. And then so they ask him, and I think he says it's a disagreement, and she says, "No, it's actually a desire for more cows." It's like that was supposed to be the thing that they decided to hire her for.
That was a little, that's a really minor flaw, but it's kind of funny. I don't know.
Well, but I felt like it's one of those things where sometimes in films they try to show you that this person is like really smart or an expert. They do it in a way that they try to take a shortcut, I think, to do it, and it just doesn't feel very true to life.
Right. I mean, I get it, though. Sometimes we have to suspend a little bit of reality in Hollywood, and that's where I differ from the guys from, like, CinemaSins and, like, who's, like, he nitpicks every little detail, and I look at it, sometimes we have to suspend disbelief a little bit, because sometimes it takes a little tidbit like that to advance the story compared to doing a 20-minute subplot about why is she credible.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to forgive those little things because you have to tell a story in 2 hours. It's like...
You do. I think there's a distinction between showing and telling, and I feel like that was them trying to show as opposed to tell, but I think it was a little clumsy. And I think a similar thing was when she meets Jeremy Renner's character, and she says something about the language being the foundation of civilization, and no, she doesn't say that. He's reading from her book. And he's like, "Oh, it's really brilliant, except it's wrong because language isn't the foundation of civilization. Science is."
Yeah,
and he's a physicist, so like it's a really clunky setup. to distinguish their personalities and their approaches.
And I thought that I actually wrote down that specific line because I specifically. You can't have, science and math, you can't understand that without language.
Yeah.
Without language, you can't communicate science and math. So they actually have to, hold hands and be together, which I thought was one of the interesting themes and connections in this film specifically is there's very much this sense of, science versus language and, science versus the supernatural. What can we explain versus, when what we can explain comes against what we can't explain.
Sure.
And those two worlds collide, and even in the spoiler alert romance between them, we see that. We see two people who have completely different backgrounds, and they come together.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the big overarching themes of this, is that coming together from two sides.
Yeah, and I that's definitely a theme I see there. I don't think they explore it as explicitly as they might suggest they're going to, but it does come up to sort of, art versus science, or reason versus intuition. But ultimately they do have to work together, and it's sometimes it's a little unclear to me exactly what he's bringing to the table from his background as I'm watching it, though. But they do somehow manage to work together, and that's supposed to point to this idea that we're supposed to make reason and intuition work together.
And I think specifically with
mystery and
the story's told through Louise's eyes, and we're supposed to assume that he has a similar background in some kind, but in his field of study, and he's been brought into this adventure the same way she has, and she's just. But I love that we don't explore him much more because the story is a whole lot more effective through Louise's eyes than us going through multiple storylines and multiple characters. Because I found in science fiction especially, stories work the best when we we do the fish out of water approach. We as an audience learn about this new world and all these new sciences and all these new scary things through the eyes of someone else who's experiencing it for the first time. When we step into a world and it's just explained to us, we don't really understand it and we don't get the awe. But when we step into a world where the character we're watching this world, the character we're connecting with is experiencing this all for the first time. We feel like we're experiencing it for the first time because humans are very, you know, connected people, you know, connected creatures, and you know, we relate to each other with empathy. You know, we have empathy for characters that, you know, don't even exist. And that's one of the things that's magical about movies specifically, is that we can project ourselves into a character that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And that may also be entirely different from us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they may be entirely different personalities, but, you know, we can find the aspects that we relate to them.
Sure.
And, you know, we project ourselves with them. So I thought that was an interesting thing, though, is that they connect, you know, or they have similar backgrounds. Not similar backgrounds in the sense that, you know, they have similar studies, but that they're both being immersed into this world specifically, but they're two opposites.
Yeah. Well, and so kind of focusing a little bit on there's all these different themes we could talk about, but maybe I'll try to go in some sort of logical way here, in a linear fashion, so to speak. One of the themes that I think comes up a lot, obviously, is going to be language. This notion that how we choose to think and communicate shapes what we believe, which is somewhat controversial in language theory and linguistics, but I think generally accepted to some extent or another. Although I think where they go in the film is maybe more of an extrapolation of that, and maybe moving into pseudoscience a little bit, where so basically the way that these creatures think is they because they sort of think in a more circular, cyclical kind of fashion, they're able to perceive past, present, and future.
Yeah.
And so that's a pretty strong, I think, moving to an extreme, I guess, from this notion that the way we think through our language forms affects what we think. But they do specifically talk. I think it comes into play specifically with how the nations of the world choose to interpret certain things the aliens are saying to them. Yeah. This notion that in the film that if all I gave you was a hammer, everything would look like a nail.
Oh, I love that. I specifically love that part because when it comes to one of the things I love about this movie specifically is that we have no idea these aliens' intentions. So, you know, the way they approach it is this whole concept of, you know, they assume that they will react like humans do. Yeah. Because we're so used to reacting, you know, aggressively or, you know, anticipating humanity, that when a being who isn't human arrives, you know, how do we react to it? We assume, is it going to be aggressive? We assume because, you know, it's playing us against each other, you know. I love that because we make automatic assumptions, and I look at it from a Christian perspective specifically. I look at it as the way, you know, we presume God is going to act like we do. We project our morality onto God, and in this story, a lot of ways I look at the aliens. They're like a deity in a lot of ways because they, you know, they kind of they see everything at once, and I thought it's a really cool way to look at like the way God looks at humanity. Because he can see the past, present, and future. And that comes into the overlying theme later, you know, of choosing life. You know, choosing to create people even though he knows we're going to fall. You know, it's kind of a really, for a universalist film, there's a lot of themes of Christianity in that, actually.
Yeah, there's a few things that I wondered if were intentional. So, I mean, there's these two aliens specifically they speak to whom they name Abbott and Costello. And one of them seems to die in the process of them trying to communicate with them. So basically, once that all these nations have decided that they're hostile, they try to, you know, sneak a bomb into the ship. And you know, when the last few minutes before it goes off, Jeremy Renner's character and Amy Adams' character go in to sort of talk to them, and the aliens know that what's going to happen. They know that this bomb is there, but it seems that one of them actually dies in the process, so he still goes through with it. So there is maybe a sort of a suggestion of maybe like God the Father and God the Son, that they sort of, but you know, there's this risk that's taken. They know what's going to happen, but they feel that it's for this greater purpose,
right? And
so they go through with it. I think there's a number of places where I wondered if, and maybe it's just one of those archetypes that shows up, but I did wonder if there were certain allusions to Christian ideas or themes. So, like for example, like I said, the notion of sort of arriving with these good intentions of love but being attacked anyway. It kind of made me think of there's a Twilight Zone episode called The Gift, where this alien comes with this cure for cancer, and he's treated with suspicion. He's like in the small Mexican village or whatever, and they kill him. And I think they specifically make a Christ allusion there. But there's other things I think that come out. So, for example, this notion of 12 that comes up in various places in the film. There are these 12 pods, which sort of have the suggestion of like the 12 apostles, these messengers. And I think there's at one point after they talk about the fact there being 12 pods, they mention these cultists that killed themselves or whatever, and they mention there's 144 of them, so that's 12 by 12.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if this notion of 12 was supposed to mean something specific, or
I don't know Denis Villeneuve's background. I know it's he changed the number of pods for this film.
Oh, okay.
Compared to
based
the
on
book.
the short story. Right?
Yeah, and the story I want to say there was 20 something in the story.
Okay.
But I know he lowered the number specifically for the film, and he never really stated why. I just know he did. I have not read the original short story, and I do know that the original short story has a lot of universalist pushing and one world government themes and stuff like that. And it's not like the author had any necessarily Christian intentions, but I think it's really fascinating specifically to find ties to Christianity in things that are not necessarily Christian, because it shows God's voice is echoing throughout humanity.
Sure. Well, yeah, it either points to an unintentional, this sort of notion of common grace or natural revelation, that we have an awareness of God, whether we consciously know it or not, or it's possible that there's just simply, I think there's still people who are literate, who are aware of Scripture and the themes that are there. I think there's less and less of them. But I've seen certain films, I think specifically in a lot of the more recent Batman films, I think there's all these, I think they're very literate films. There's an awareness of the Bible, of Western culture and civilization. I think Dark Knight Rises in particular has this sort of like French Revolution themes and ties together, bringing it into Occupy Wall Street. And so I'm still seeing where I think there's some folks who are aware of these themes and feel like there's at least some fodder there, something that you can use to tell a story,
right?
Whether they are necessarily Christian or not, but I think we're kind of the one world government thing that you talked about. There's hints of it in this film of trying to kind of overcome our suspicion and work together, and I think what happens in a lot of these sci-fi things, films and books and TV shows or whatever, there is this notion of suspicion versus trust, and that we need to be willing to trust each other. Which I think can be naive. Not that the suspicion approach is any better, but we do have this very difficult, sort of rock and a hard place situation where we're aware that humans or life forms perhaps can be good, but we also are aware of that hostility because it exists in us. And how do you balance suspicion versus trust? Should I let my child go out of my sight when we're at the mall when she's 4 years old? Do I trust people enough to say, she'll be fine? No, I don't. but so
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. And so I think that there is this complicated relationship that we have with other human beings, other life forms or whatever, and it's not, it's not entirely paranoid. I mean, there's something to it. And so I understand this notion of, okay, what are they here for? What are they doing? And how far do you extend, your willingness to trust and be charitable when there could be genuine danger? And I think that is, I don't think this film goes too overboard in criticizing that paranoia, but I feel like in some sci-fi films they tend to, well, if we just, trusted the Russians, we could all work together, and especially the Cold War type stuff.
I love going back to the line specifically. The aliens ask she asks the aliens, "What is your purpose on Earth?" And I like to think about that as the aliens are really here asking us, what is our purpose on Earth? They're giving us the weapon, and they're teaching us how to look into the future and into the past at the same time.
The weapon is that's a controversial. So they misunderstand.
Yeah.
Whether it's a weapon or a tool, but it's understood to be a weapon, right?
Yeah. So their word for it was weapon, but it's a tool. A tool and weapon are the same. They don't know the difference. So, they're here to give us their language and teach us what our purpose is, but we're concerned about what their purpose is. They're beyond us. At this point.
Yeah, no, so there's that idea too that the gift is the language itself, that somehow we'll benefit from being able to see the past, present, and future, and not experiencing time in a linear fashion. I think it's fair to ask whether that's a gift.
Yeah, it seems more like a burden. You think about how it overwhelms Louise. You think about how God looks at us, and he looks at the choices we're going to make and just shakes his head like idiots.
Well, specifically, what comes out is this notion of determinism. She's the big spoiler is that the movie starts where you're aware that she has this child, and the child dies of this rare disease, and then as the film goes on, you become aware that this child doesn't die before the events of the aliens coming.
But it's flash forwards, it's not flashbacks.
It's after. Yeah. But she knows before she has this child, because she's given this gift of seeing the future, that she's going to die somewhat young. Yeah. And she chooses it anyway. And so she says, there's this quotation from the film, or something she says, "Despite knowing the journey and where it leads, I embrace it and I welcome every moment of it." And so on one level, I think the film can read like a Greek tragedy. You know what you're going to lose, but you proceed forward anyway, as if you might not lose it. But then it's not, because she isn't trying to fight the future. She's not trying to fight her destiny. She's embracing it, and
that might be the most pro-life statement I've ever heard from a Hollywood film, right there.
Oh, that's pretty interesting.
I mean, really, you think about it in a way, it's like you're talking about, this is Hollywood, the world of liberal progressivism. And and that is the most pro-life statement I've ever heard. She knows this person's not going to have the greatest quality of life. This child that she creates, and she chooses life anyway. She chooses to love this this child, and this child love her back. This reciprocating relationship, this motherhood, and and then the biggest, saddest part of it all is that Jeremy Renner's character leaves her after he finds out that she knew that this child would die. Mm-hmm. He abandons her, says she made the wrong choice. Mm-hmm. She made, and I actually made a note about that specifically. It looks, I love how it, kind of replicates how God chooses to love us despite our actions. That we fail, that we die, and that He could prevent our pain, but it would also prevent us life and joy, and that reciprocating relationship. And we tend to think about how somebody can suffer, but how much joy and love and life are they going to feel too?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a notion that life is itself a good.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think we tend to question in the West at this stage. Yeah,
we really do.
But I do think, though, the kind of determinism that one accepts, I think, ought to affect how one views life and its purpose and those kinds of things. So, like, if one believed that God determined the future, whether in whole, like a Calvinist perspective, or in part, like an Arminian perspective, then someone who believes that, they might find comfort in knowing that they're in good hands despite life's heartaches. But if the future is determined merely by material causes that one has no chance of affecting, which will result necessarily in one's utter annihilation, then I think that there's good reason, if you believe that, to live without hope. Or you could simply just have the determination to enjoy what you can, eat, drink, and tomorrow we die.
Thanks, Dave. That was a Dave Matthews reference, I'm
sorry. In a materialistic universe, there is this notion that everything is predetermined by, material causes, that, including every choice that we make. That there is no such thing as free choice on an atheistic, materialistic universe. It kind of goes back to like what Laplace's notion that if you had an omniscient observer, somebody who could see where every particle in the universe was and the velocity and the direction it was heading, he would know everything that had happened before and everything that would happen later. And so in that perspective, there's really no notion of free will. And I think maybe the film is suggesting a kind of like compatibilism. This notion that you can have free will and determinism on the basis that, well, you still do what you want to do, even though you can't actually make a choice, which I don't think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think, Kant referred to compatibilism as the wretched subterfuge.
Right. Well, I think of the line specifically when she and Louise and Ian are, after all of it's said and done, the pods have disintegrated, and she asks him, if you could see your life, if you could see all of your life at once, would you do anything over again? Mm-hmm. If you could see it from beginning to end, is there anything you would, change? Mm-hmm. And he doesn't really have a real answer to that.
I think he says something like, maybe I would say what I was feeling more.
Yeah, I was saying what I was feeling more, and I was like, I think they missed a real moment there to really, say what I was feeling more. That's your only regret. But that's the real question for the audience. Would you? Mm-hmm. Would you, Cody? Would you change anything if you could see your life from beginning to end?
Oh, I'm sure I would. But the question is, would I actually have the ability to do it?
Right.
And I think that it's not entirely clear to me, but it seems to me that the film is saying you don't. Mm-hmm. I mean, the past, present, future exist. I mean, she can't. I mean, it seems like what her choice to do is she doesn't make a choice to, do X or Y, but to simply enjoy what she's going to know she's going to do anyway.
Yeah, that's kind of what I picked up on it from it as well. She's going to do what she enjoys anyway. She's going to enjoy what she's going to do anyway. Mm-hmm. So I look at it as, it's not saying we have a choice, because if you look at it, when she goes forward and it was the Japanese prime or the Chinese prime minister, mm-hmm. or the ambassador, or whoever it was specifically, it wasn't the emperor. It was one of the high leaders. Mm-hmm. She says to him, or he says, you called me on my private number.
So yeah, he talks about how all these governments of the world started, led by the Chinese, are going to attack the ships, and he meets her months after everything clears up, and says, well, what happened that day was when you called me, you changed my mind, and you called me on my private number.
Yeah, and you said, you said my wife's dying words to me, and to me, he looks at her and he knows exactly what he has to say to her, because she says, I had your private number. She's like, I don't have your private number, and he shows it to her. So to me, that's the biggest, and this is something I missed on my first watch through and I caught on my second watch through. It's really pushing the fact that there isn't a choice.
Yeah.
He knew exactly what she needed to know, because he understood the language now too. Mm-hmm. So he knew that she had to see that information for time to happen the way it does.
Yeah, and I did wonder, I'm still thinking about this, whether or not that's coherent or not. Because
it's hard to wrap around.
Yeah, I mean, even if you view time as cyclical, there are still logical causes and effects, right? And so what was the cause of the Chinese government deciding not to attack the ships? Well, the cause was her calling. Mm-hmm. And what was the cause of that? Well, the cause of that was him giving her the number, but he couldn't have given her the number unless they all survived and didn't attack the ships. I don't know. So there's something, I think, somewhat questionable about whether that's coherent. Maybe I'm...
Unless there's for some reason she can, and this is, I mean, I have no idea because it doesn't necessarily explain it in this film, but if she can see into different timelines of the decisions...
Oh, possible timelines?
Yeah, possible timelines.
I don't think there's any notion... I don't know. I don't see any notion of possible. I think
it doesn't say that, but that's really the only way that I can kind of make coherent sense of it, is that she can see possible timelines and then make choices. Yeah. But it doesn't really make that clear, and so I would lean towards no, it doesn't.
Yeah. Well, I think about, like, I think of, like, time travel movies. I think of, like, Back to the Future, mm-hmm. and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And I think Back to the Future is completely incoherent and makes no sense. But I think Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure makes actually a great deal of sense in a lot of ways. But the one thing that's maybe sort of similar is, so at one point they're sort of stuck in jail, and earlier in the film you remember that, I think it's either Bill or Ted's dad, one of them's a cop, and so they're in their dad stuck in one of them's dad's jail cell, and in the beginning of the film the dad is saying, oh, I can't find my keys, and then when they're in the jail cell, like, how are we going to get out of this? And he says, oh, you know what? I'm going to hide the keys over here. I'm going to go back in time, and I'm going to hide the keys in this corner, my dad's keys in this corner of the jail cell. So when we get out of here, I'm going to go do that. And so then he goes to the corner of the jail cell, and there are the keys, and he gets himself out. And so there's sort of a similar loop there. And I was trying to figure out if that loop makes more sense or not. Is that are either of them
loop
coherent?
Actually, I don't know. I think that loop does make more sense, to be honest. I don't know. I think that definitely makes a little more sense, because with him there's too much to fill in with this Chinese general or whatever. Knowing what he needed to show her specifically in that moment in the future.
Yeah.
Because
he doesn't go back in time and do it. But
right.
I guess he does in a way because he communicates it to her and she sees it at another point in time.
Yeah.
So I guess what you have to be aware of is that time is static. So in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, you can actually affect it in some ways.
Right.
So you can create a loop. But in Arrival, time is static. So everything kind of exists as it is. Mm-hmm. But there's something about it that suggests a plan. I feel like there's some superintendence that would allow that to happen. It's never explicitly stated or anything that there's this idea of God, but you do wonder if
Well, and then it comes down to, the aliens specifically, they say they need help in 3,000 years. They need help from humanity in 3,000 years. They can see that far ahead, but there's nothing they can do about the help. There's nothing they can do themselves to change it, but they need help from humanity. So it's in a similar way, she's doing exactly with the Chinese general what they are doing with her.
Mm-hmm.
She goes forward and gets the help from him.
Yeah.
And they're going here to get help for the future because they know she's the key to helping them 3,000 years from now.
But I think there's this question of what is it that actually determines our actions? Because if they know that it's set in stone, what is it that has determined it? Is it simply material? Is it atoms being around? Is it God's plan? Mm-hmm. What is it?
Yeah, is it destiny? See, I kind of took that the theme, what Denis Villeneuve was trying to give us was destiny, that it's determined. And that's kind of what I picked up from it, but I don't know if it goes much deeper than that, to be honest, because I really think he's pushing that everything's are predetermined and we're just going to enjoy the punches as they come.
Yeah, but is that kind of like atheistic pseudo-optimism, or is that like God's plan?
I have no idea.
but maybe speaking to a theme that I think is more explicitly stated, this idea that it's actually a gift, that we'd be better off knowing that we had no freedom of choice, but seeing the future, past, and present anyway. Is that actually the case? So let's say that we actually have no choices, right?
Right.
And so is it better if we know that we have no free choice, or is it better if we think we do have free choice and that our choices matter and have significance? Would we be better people? Would we be happier?
I think we as humanity would definitely be better people if we thought we had free choice.
Yeah.
Because I think we're going to do more good.
Yeah.
If everything's predetermined, that's pretty bleak humanity.
I think so. I think a more like Augustinian or Calvinist notion of it, at least in that perspective, there's God. There's a purpose that we can get behind. Mm-hmm. But I feel like in an atheist universe, it is bleak. And I don't see how you can find any joy in that. And I think that goes back to this fundamental problem with atheism, is that there's this sort of assumption that like, oh, well, we're willing to believe what's true even if it's bleak, and aren't we brave and aren't we wonderful? But the ultimate reality is that we would be better and happier people as a whole, as a species, if we believed false things.
I think they're... So does that come down to the ignorance is bliss? Or,
kind of.
in a lot of ways.
I think if atheistic materialism is true, it would be a terrible thing if everybody believed it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, I would agree.
So
it would be quite sad. It'd be a very unromantic world.
Yeah, which I think ultimately means that in atheistic materialism, truth isn't really a value. It's only a value insofar as it contributes to some other goal that we subjectively create, such as human flourishing or whatever. So I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
And so I do wonder, this notion that, it would be a gift to see your fate. I question that. I mean, the one thing I guess that is positive is there is something about like her knowing how much time she has with her daughter, so that she actually seeks to get joy out of every moment of it. And there's something like that, right? You're going to lose a loved one because they have this terrible disease and they have 6 months to live or whatever, so you find joy in those moments. I see that, but I don't see much else as far as a benefit.
Yeah, I think it works in the story for Louise specifically, because I think Louise is maybe the only character in this story who knows how to understand it and use it responsibly.
Yeah.
And that's, a whole race, her teaching a whole race to understand this language, I don't think advances society. In fact, I think it, makes a bleak society.
Sure. Well, so for example, her husband leaving her. Mm-hmm. She knows that he's going to do it. She knows that their time is limited. But it ends, not like with the way her daughter, her daughter dies. But it ends with her husband in almost like a betrayal in a way.
Yeah.
He stops feeling for her. He's angry with her. He doesn't want to be with her anymore. And yet she still goes through all the motions.
Well, and she still tells him that their daughter's going to die.
But there's that. But I think also, could you really find all this joy in a marriage that you knew for certain was going to end with your husband leaving you?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, could you? I don't know.
No, I could not. I don't think I could. I would, if I knew it was not going to work out, I would not have gotten married.
Yeah, but she's like, she says something like,
but that's because I'm human, and there is an aspect of selfishness in there with humanity, and inherent selfishness that you don't want to inflict pain on yourself. It's like, the oven's hot, you don't touch it.
Yeah.
If the oven's hot, you don't touch it. I think that's the hardest and most human part of her decision to go ahead and have her daughter anyways, because she felt like the love for her daughter and the reciprocating love back and forth was outweighed, her marriage, and outweighed the death and the hardness of the loss.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that is the only beacon of hope I find in that, thought process, is that, you can still see the love shining through it, shining through the bleakest of situations. And that, to me, that is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Specifically.
Yeah, well, I think that they're to maybe dial back a little bit from what I was saying. I mean, there is this notion that, God loves us enough to, put himself out there to risk this pain. But I think, I guess the example I was going to use doesn't work if you're a Calvinist. It only works if you're an Arminian, which is this notion that, God might enter into a relationship with you that you would later reject. And so that doesn't mean God is any less present, or that his grace is any less there, that your relationship with him is any less real. But I guess on a Calvinist perspective, there's the elect and there's the non-elect, and there you go. but I guess I would say maybe there's something in maybe what happens with Louise and her husband that is a little bit like how an Arminian, someone who believes in free will, that God hasn't chosen who's going to be saved and is going to damn everybody else.
Right.
That there is a parallel there to that Arminian view of God, that God might choose to be in this relationship knowing where it's going to go, and be no less sincere.
Right.
So there's some, I guess, that maybe to dial back a little bit on my criticism there. Maybe I'm just maybe maybe I don't have enough grace to appreciate what Louise is doing there.
No, I don't know. I think that story definitely is going to vary for different people as far as how they perceive that part. I thought it was a beautiful aspect especially coming from a secular, culture that we're in now, to see somebody choosing life and love over the consequences. That to me, that gives me a little beacon of hope that there's still some, that our culture's not entirely depraved. That we still are a culture that still wants to love and wants to, choose life, no matter how far away we, separate ourselves from it.
Yeah. Well, there's something I think maybe of like what ethicists distinguish between a deontological ethic and a consequentialist ethic, or teleological, where one side says this is good regardless of what happens. You do X because it's the right thing to do, and who cares about the consequences, versus well, it's only good if the consequences are good. And, so even though she knows what the consequences, the ultimate end of choosing to have a child and choosing to be married or whatever, she still does it because there's value in the thing itself. And that, there's something to hold on to there. So I don't know, which I think is, ultimately a more Christian ethic, but so yeah, there's definitely this. I guess where I'm pushing at the film is, hey, I'm seeing a lot of Christian presuppositions and underpinnings here. Why don't you guys go all the way with it? Maybe that's where my criticism, my pushback is just saying, hey, there's a lot here. I'm seeing a lot of Christ here and a lot of Christ here, but I'm not sure that you get all the way.
Right.
You don't really follow necessarily everything to this logical conclusion. So there's something missing. This sort of cafeteria style spirituality where I'd like to take what works for me and then, everything else I'll sort of cast to the swine or whatever, to the dogs.
We thought about the cult and stuff that, all killed themselves when the pods came down, and it brought me back to another Dave Matthews lyric, because we referenced a Dave Matthews lyric earlier. But he asks if Martians fell from the sky, what would that do to God? And honestly, how would world religions react if beings that we don't understand or comprehend showed up? What would that do to our religion? What would that do to all of the faiths of the world? How open are theologians to extraterrestrial life? I don't have the answer to that. I don't know how open they are. I know personally I would be quite interested, because the Bible really only references what's, Earth's relevance and everything, but I don't want to sound like a Mormon. So, no offense to any Mormons out there, Mitt Romney.
Yeah, as far as the aliens thing, I mean, I guess maybe there'd be some of the same conflicts that exist over evolutionary theory, which is, it has to do with, evolutionary theory, I think, has made people question the significance of humans, where we sort of exist on this continuum of life. And I suppose that would, there'd be similar disagreements within the church about how to look at that. I know, like, C.S. Lewis, in his space trilogy,
love that trilogy,
has some notions about
if I could ever make a sci-fi movie or direct a sci-fi movie, it would be Out of the Silent Planet.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a great film. But in there, Earth is called the Silent Planet because it's the planet that's fallen. So every other world that exists and it's populated.
And that's what I've always kind of wondered, is if there was life out there, and not to sound like a crazy conspiracy theorist, because someone's going to listen to this and I'm going to find trivia on my IMDb page that I'm a conspiracy theorist or something. But if there are aliens and stuff out there, does the salvation story affect them? I would argue no, because if they're not human, then no.
Yeah, that's tricky. So I think there is this notion, I think, in specifically, like you see it in 1 Corinthians, this notion, and elsewhere actually in Scripture, that what Jesus did affects the entire universe.
Oh, really? Okay.
So in some way, shape, or form, we're talking. Romans talks about the world is groaning, and so I think there's this notion of sort of a cosmic effect that is of sin, so to speak, and that Christ has kind of resolved everything. So there's this notion of the physical world and the spiritual world and angels and powers and principalities, and that all of them are sort of affected by what Christ has done, that all of them will sort of become ordered under the headship of Christ. So, how exactly that would affect, outside sort of thinking life forms, it probably depends on the life form. If they come to us and they're sinners, or if they come to us and they're not affected by that. They're
I'm fascinated. I can't wait. I want to find out.
Yeah, I think we'd have to deal with that.
If you're listening, aliens, let us know. What is your biblical ideology? Are you Calvinist or are you Arminian?
Well, is there anything else we want to say in closing? So, ultimately, like I said, this is actually, a really fascinating film, and it does deal with a lot of pretty interesting theological and philosophical
It is a
topics.
lot of fun to watch. It is actually another tidbit of information about this film is the cinematographer was the first African-American cinematographer to ever be nominated for an Oscar for cinematography.
Oh, wow. That
is a huge deal and a huge groundbreaking thing. I actually think, while I was rooting for him very much, La La Land did get the cinematography Oscar, and I was quite excited about that because the colors were just phenomenal, the use of color. But overall, yeah, this film is it's phenomenal. It's beautiful to look at. It's a lot of fun to watch. It'll get you talking with your family. There's really nothing majorly inappropriate about it. I think there's little bit of language here and there.
Yeah.
But it's PG-13, and you don't have to worry about anything for the kids.
Sure. Well, that's one thing I kind of liked, because we talked about the notion of the romance, but I guess it could have been explored a little bit more. But but ultimately, that is one element that comes out, is because it's sort of a tertiary story. You don't have the compulsory sex scene or anything like that.
Yeah, it's true. And there are a lot of sci-fi films that they just throw in the sex scenes just to get people in the theater.
Yeah, sure.
Exploit the one thing everybody thinks about, right?
Sure. Everybody's already interested in the sex.
Everybody's interested.
And this alien has 3 boobs, so...
yeah.
So
Total Recall, was that?
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Joseph. This was a fantastic conversation. It was a good film to talk about. I appreciate you suggesting it. I hadn't seen it until we prepared for this, so I'm glad I had the opportunity to watch it.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks. And, if anybody wants to learn more, I did mention you can find you on YouTube, Average Joe.
Yes, if you can, Average Joe Films, watch our new series, Ground Rules for Living with Your Ex. It's a 7-episode web series, comedy, dramatic, a lot of fun. You can follow me on Instagram, Joseph Cox Official. I'm a filmmaker, a musician, random guy, and your friend.
Great. And do you have a website or anything like that?
Yeah, you can visit averagejoefilms.com if you want to see some of the stuff we're doing coming up. And we're working on a brand new science fiction noir drama just for you.
Nice. And so, apart from all your own independent projects, you also do some freelancing stuff.
Yes, so we do a lot of corporate videos and shoot weddings. I mostly shoot weddings for other companies just because it's a lot of paperwork. But we shoot corporate videos. We recently just did a video for 7 Star Academy, which is a online school, an online Christian school actually. You should check them out. They're a really cool organization. And but yeah, I do a lot of freelance work and a lot of corporate and Kickstarter videos and stuff.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jim.
Thank you.